Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. How are you all doing today? And the reason I always start out all of our webinars with good morning, afternoon, evening, other than that's the way I start my iHeartRadio show, it's because we have people on the webinar today, because we're doing this live, unless you happen to be listening to the recording, that are in all different time zones. So I don't know if you are in your morning, your afternoon, or your evening when you happen to be looking at my face right now. So welcome, everybody. I'm excited to be doing this webinar with you today. When I was an MSP, I wish that Foresite had been around and been doing the work that they're doing for MSSPs, because cybersecurity has become such a huge problem for anybody in our business doing tech. And every client, even if they don't ask you about cybersecurity, they're thinking about it and they're assuming that you are doing it. So we're really pleased here at SASMAX to have Foresite as one of our vendors that we can offer you as a reseller or an MSP to round out your portfolio and to help you keep your security going well for your clients, because liability is a big part of our business, and you really don't want to sit there dealing with problems that could have been prevented if you had been able to see what was happening. So let's get started. And I'd like to introduce, because we have so much material to cover, but wait, before I do that, I want to tell you, if you have any questions, please type questions in the question pane on your question panel pane. If you have technical issues, please use the chat window. I'll be monitoring both throughout the webinar and asking the questions of our presenter at the end of the webinar. So remember, type your questions in the question pane. I'd like to present Tracy Fox, the National Director of Partner Enablement for Foresite. And yep, we've got the webinar. It works. I always love it when a plan comes together, Tracy.
Good afternoon.
Welcome. I'm really excited to have you here, as you probably just heard me say. I really think that your product really changes the landscape for MSSPs and resellers and MSPs. So I'm going to let you dive right in. I'm going to drop off my webcam and let you go to it.
Great. Thank you, Laura. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. And we'll talk about the SPIF after we go through why you need us and what we can help you to do, because I think that's really what you're here to hear about today. Apologize, my camera's a little dim. We've got a stormy afternoon here in Connecticut, where I'm located. So why do you need Foresite? What are the problems that your client's facing? Laura touched on this. Really, cybersecurity and compliance are a key factor for any organization at this point. And there's a few different reasons why. The first one we wanted to touch on is the fact that threats are evolving. It used to be that if you had a strong firewall and really good backups, then your customers were pretty well protected because their data could be recovered and there weren't that many threats from the outside. But as we know, that's very different now. There are threats from the outside, threats from the inside. Edge protection just isn't enough. You need a more holistic approach to security. And so that's one factor, even for folks that don't fall under compliance. But it's hard to find those folks because point number two, compliance regulations are changing, evolving, increasing. And so now it goes far beyond credit card data, health data. It's now affecting manufacturers, especially if they do subcontracting work for the government. Now they fall under a requirement called NIST 853. Organizations that maintain information on citizens of Europe are now part of the new GDPR requirements that started in May. There are about 25, roughly, states that have various requirements for cybersecurity, some in certain sectors and some are statewide. And it's just continuing to increase. There's already talk that the U.S. will also put out a cybersecurity framework that needs to be followed to protect sensitive information. So it's much easier to find someone who is under some type of compliance or their customers are requiring that they meet certain compliance than to find someone who's not affected by that. And then we get to the third point. So maybe people think that you don't have to worry about it unless you have an incident, but that's not true either. Enforcement is becoming much more proactive and increasing. The FTC, Federal Trade Commission, has been the key player in that environment. We have, I think, 3 or 4 current clients right now that came to us after the FTC showed up and noticed something on their website along the lines of, we protect our customers' data. So the FTC can just show up and say, great, show us how you do that. And I know one of the clients in particular, a pharma company, it's about a 40, 50 person company, not huge at all. They have multiple locations. They do not have any HIPAA data. So they were doing some things to protect data, but they didn't follow any framework because they didn't think they had to. But because they did have some personal information, the FTC found that they were not following a framework to protect that data in a responsible way. They fined them over $100,000 and put them in a 20-year remediation program. So they're just one of the many. The Consumer Protection and the FTC have both been doing proactive enforcement as well, and it's going to continue to increase. So next, let's take a look at how we can help. We know when your clients come to you with these issues, you have some challenges. Your workload that you have today, everything that you're currently doing for them, oftentimes your team is already stretched a little bit thin. If you're looking to help them with the compliance requirements and cybersecurity best practice to monitor their environment, and you start looking at the cost of putting in a SIM tool and putting together a security operations center and staffing that team, that gets very expensive. And then same thing with hiring compliance expertise. It's very hard to find people because the unemployment rate for good people in cyber and compliance is almost zero. Then you have to be able to pay them, and then you have to have enough work to challenge them to keep them on board. So all this becomes a real barrier for MSPs to be able to get started with moving into these areas, and that's what we're here for. We are a managed cybersecurity and compliance services firm that only sells through our reseller channel. So our goal is to help you to be able to enter this marketplace, having a team of 60 people that are helping you with everything from identifying opportunities, going through the pre-sales process, putting together statements of work, proposing them with your clients. We are there as part of your team. We don't do any direct sales. We only work through our resellers. And as you'll see over on the right-hand side there, the reason that we partnered with the SaaS channel is because it's an easier way for you to engage with us as a reseller. Our old model used to be that you filled out a reseller program agreement and you were given a quota and a territory. And that was a little bit of a barrier to some of the resellers who weren't really sure how much business they would be able to do. But now through SaaS, you automatically have access to all of our services right away, and you don't have any issues with quota, territory, or separate paperwork. We are a US-based company. Our headquarters is in Overland Park, Kansas, and I'm on our East Coast office. We have a West Coast office, so we service all of the US and Canada, and then we have a secondary security operations center just outside of London that serves our European clients. And what do we do? The portfolio of services is outlined here. One that I'll touch on a little bit deeper is our managed security service over on the left. That is a proprietary solution that includes a cloud-based SIM as well as our managed security operations center. So it gives you a way to enter that market without having to have any investment on your own. We can also do firewall management or co-management, incident response, both entry level with the service itself, where we're doing response to issues that we detect and dealing with them remotely. But we have a full incident response team, so we can send boots on the ground for incidents outside even of our provision solution. Threat intelligence is also a piece of that. Most of the time, clients engage initially in the middle column. So you may have customers who come to you and ask for a penetration test because they have a client or a commercial insurer or some other stakeholder that's asking them to verify that they've done that type of testing proactively. So that's a lot of where we see engagement. And also the cloud security assessment down at the bottom. We're doing quite a bit of that as more and more people migrate to the cloud and rely on SaaS services and they need to make sure that they are set up securely, and if they fall under compliance, that they're meeting those compliance requirements. And then that leads over to the third column all the way over on the right, where compliance often starts with a gap assessment. So taking PCI, for example, payment card industry, the self-assessment questionnaires now require a C-level executive to sign off. Used to be the IT person would fill it out and the owner of the business or the C-level didn't often get involved. But now that the C-level has to sign, they are usually looking for a third party to help to verify that what they're attesting to is accurate, because they can be held liable for that. And we have many instances where people come to us after the fact and we have to help them out of it. But we can do assessments, audits, attestations, assist with remediation consulting. We're always going to be bringing them back to you as their reseller for any solutions that come out of that work. And we can also act as a virtual CISO for them. Wanted to share a couple of examples because I think this helps paint the picture of how we can engage. This particular example was a law firm, about 3 locations, 60 people total, and they went to their reseller who would sell them firewalls every 5 or 6 years and help them out with projects. They had taken on a malpractice case and they were going to be dealing with HIPAA information, so they had to sign a HIPAA business associates agreement. And the partners in the firm wanted to make absolutely sure that everything they were attesting to in that agreement, they were living up to. So they went to their IT director, who went to the reseller, who said, boy, we're not that familiar with HIPAA, but we have a partner we can bring in. So we did that gap assessment for them, made sure that they were achieving everything they needed to sign off with confidence that they were compliant. And one of the things that we uncovered during that gap assessment was that their IT director was doing some security monitoring as required, but he was one person, so he really couldn't do it 24/7, 365. And he was relying on a free tool, and it had some limitations. So we were able to introduce him to our Provision solution, which was a much better fit for them. They put that into place. A few years later, they took on a major bank client, an international bank, who sent them a questionnaire, and it wasn't a typical security questionnaire. This thing was about 100 pages. It was the most involved one we had ever even seen. And so one of their concerns was, we have one IT person, one help desk person at the firm, and we have new clients coming on all the time. We don't have the time to fill out all these different questionnaires. Is there anything you can do to help us there? So we helped them to align with the NIST cybersecurity framework, which is a known framework, so that we could give them an attestation, and they shared that with their new clients instead of having to fill out all of the individual questionnaires. And that's worked really well for them. For the reseller, they went from making money when they sold them hardware every 5 or 6 years to an ongoing revenue stream that's been anywhere from 20, 25,000 in the slower years per year to 50, 60,000 in the busier years where they've had more compliance projects with us. And then we have another example on the next slide, which is one of my favorites. It's the biggest MSSP deal that we have closed to date. And what I love about it is how it came about, because there was a reseller who was called into a college who was looking to replace 2 firewalls. That was it. That was the project. We want to get rid of our Junipers and put in Palo Alto. But while he was discussing this project with the IT team, he was hearing them complain that they were being stretched thin, budget cuts, people were being laid off or retiring and they weren't being replaced. So this IT team now is responsible for physical security systems, telephone systems, you name it. And so when he went back to his office to do the quote for the firewalls, he was thinking about the fact that he knew we did co-management. So he called me up and he said, I don't know if I'll go for this, but could you give me a quote that I could show on my quote as an option for Provision with the co-management, so that if they get super busy, they can throw change requests over the fence to you all, and you can also be pushing the updates to make sure that they're done in timely fashion. We did that, but the best part of the story is this particular school has to submit any quotes that they approve up to a board, and the board oversees 17 colleges and universities. And when the board saw it and questioned what it was, they asked me to join a call to describe the solution, and the board said, wait a minute, why are we only doing this at one? All of the colleges and universities have the same issues. So the contract expanded They replaced the firewalls in all locations and put our services in all locations, which for that reseller was a $2.5 million Palo Alto deal and a just shy of $2 million deal with us for the first 3 years, which is already expanded, and they're expanding it again come July. So that's a great success story, and it all started by a reseller just thinking about security and compliance and how to help his customer and how we could help them to help this customer. Our value proposition. We're often asked, who are your competitors and how do you differentiate, which by extension, how can you as a reseller differentiate? So we put some of the top names here, but the real things to focus on are the advantages. So even if your customers are working with other firms, it doesn't mean that there's not an opportunity. For example, in the first column, with the cyber testing and compliance consulting, some of the firms that do that have incident response, but a lot of them don't. So that's a good place to ask about. Great, maybe you've done your HIPAA gap assessment already or your NIST assessment if you're a manufacturer, but what do you have in place for incident response? Also, if they haven't worked with someone else or if they've had a bad experience, a lot of times it's because compliance people, hate to say it, but they're often checklist people. So they've got the list of all the requirements for the compliance. They may know those very well and they know how to go in and do an interview, but many of them don't truly have a technical background like our team does. So when our team goes in, they're not just going through questions, but they're doing functional testing and validation. And when we give a client a report, we're very confident that that client knows where they stand and what, if anything, they need to do to fill gaps and improve their posture. As far as the MSSPs, other MSSPs, certainly you can resell their solutions, and Solutionary and SecureWorks are two that often MSPs are already working with. Not saying they're not good solutions, but where we can stand apart is because our tool is a proprietary tool, we have a lot more flexibility in tailoring solutions. So a couple quick examples. We had a client who was brought to us that was a startup, and they used a technology licensed by NASA. They didn't have any way of tracking when they used it to pay a royalty. Well, because this data that when they did the scan would flow through the firewall, we could capture it for them, and we were able to write a custom report for them to solve that problem. Wasn't really part of our solution, but it was something we were able to do and resolve for them. Another example was a reseller who had a client that was with Solutionary for a few years. They weren't unhappy with the service, but they got 2 change requests a month. So they realized the client had tracked it and said, okay, we average 27 or 28 changes a year. So we'd like Solutionary to give us 24 a year so that we only have to pay for the 3 or 4 additional. And there was no bending of the rules. With us, we do a fixed cost model. So it doesn't matter how many events per second, how much bandwidth, how many change requests, how many events, none of that. It's flat fee, and the client can use this as much as they need to, and they don't have to worry about blowing the budget and then trying to figure out what they're going to do. And then the last, SIM tools. SIM tools are fantastic, and we do have customers who have them. Sometimes they're leveraging us on top of the SIM tool just for the 24/7 monitoring and alerting, so someone's watching it all the time. But in most cases, when they come to us, it's because they truly did not realize SIM tool resources are ongoing. It's not just the cost of the tool and the initial implementation, it's ongoing cost, updates, training, tuning, monitoring. And so they realize that they spend a lot of money and they may not really be able to use the tool, or they're using 5 or 10% of what the tool can do, and it's just not working well for them. So in some cases, we're in line with the tool where we're providing our services and the tool exists. If they do have a successful implementation, they can still use it. But in a lot of cases, they're replacing it and eliminating that cost. And if they haven't already purchased a SIM, it's a much lower cost of entry to work with us and use our cloud-based SIM because they're not paying for an expensive appliance and a bunch of licensing and big implementation. It's all part of the service. Market adoption, I wanted to touch on some of the key areas where you can find opportunities. And so one is like that example I shared where you're quoting a new firewall. We can give you a quick quote that you can show as an option with your hardware quote and start uncovering those opportunities and most importantly, having those conversations with your client. Same thing with competitive quotes. If they have an MSSP and it's coming up for renewal, checking in with them to see if they'd like to look at another option. How happy are they with the service? A lot of times people have it, and they know they need it, but they're not thrilled with the communication they're getting or the level of visibility. Or if they're working with an MSSP and they have their firewalls managed, in almost every other case, they're going to be locked out of those firewalls themselves, where we will do co-management, which is a differentiator. Or clients who can't afford a SIM. They know they need to do something, or they want to have something like that in place, but they know they don't have the budget. They're a compliance client and they may not be meeting the newest requirements. There's some changes coming right now with PCI that are important for them to understand, and so they may not be aware of them and know what to do. And then lastly, organizations who maintain or transmit data on European citizens. The general data protection requirement is brand new. It just started in May, and there's a lot of confusion around who does it apply to and how do we determine what we need to do. And it's a lot more extensive, and the definition of data that needs to be protected is a lot more broad than anything we've dealt with in the U.S. So all of this is a lot of opportunity for you to engage with your clients, to think about the fact that if you're not having these conversations with them, somebody else will be, and they might come in and steal the client away. And on the other hand, if they engage with us, we have a 98% renewal rate for provision from our customers. Over 85% of our clients who engage on the consulting side come back for repeat business, other projects, moving into provision because they're happy with how we provide the value for them and working with our team. And we have never paid an SLA penalty. So on the slide, it mentions 2017, but we've never had to pay one. So we're really very focused on the customer experience and making you look good. We put in the slide some of the questions that you can ask to uncover opportunities. One of the hurdles I hear sometimes from MSPs is, I'd love to do this. I know I need to do this and I want to do this, but I don't want to start a conversation I can't finish. These questions are easy questions to ask where you can open the door to a conversation, but again, leverage us. Explain to them that you've partnered with a company that specializes in cybersecurity and compliance. So you're giving them that separation of duties, because if they're doing implementation or you're doing implementation for them and you're selling them hardware and supporting it, then really you shouldn't be the ones that are testing it and checking for gaps in the compliance. But we'll work together and help them. So all you have to do is ask them these simple questions, find a potential opportunity, and then reach out and we'll help do everything else. We can jump on calls together, or we can give you scoping questions to ask them, and we'll uncover the opportunity and scope it out. And I think my favorite one here is the one all the way over on the right, because if you ask someone if they have an incident response plan, most of the time they'll just say they do. But if you say it's 2 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday and you've just been breached, what's the first thing you do? And they don't have an immediate answer, then they don't really have a plan. And then the next question I'll ask them is, okay, wait a minute, it's 2 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday. How do you know you've been breached? What do you have in place to be able to detect if something has happened? So those are the kinds of simple questions you don't have to know all the compliance requirements to be able to ask that can help us find opportunities together. And we can go deeper into this, and we have a reseller training guide that we provide as well. Some pricing examples. What I used here is just to give you an idea of the different price points. Cyber testing is based on the number of targets. So an example would be a penetration test. It's one of the most common requests that we get based on the number of IPs. And so this would be your cost as negotiated through SaaSmax. So we would give you a statement of work that shows your cost, and then you're able to add your desired markup on to what you bill to your customer. And the billing flows from you to your customer. So you can see there's very low entry points for cyber testing. It's something even small businesses can afford to do. Compliance consulting gets a little bit pricier, but if it's an assessment, you usually can still get in around $10,000 or a little under, depending on the size and scope. Audits are a little higher because with audits, we have to not only confirm what's in place, but we have to gather evidence for every single requirement and document everything. But you'll see we also have consulting retainers. So a good example for that is the cloud security. If a customer is looking to make a move into cloud security and they want to talk through the project, they don't have to pay for a really pricey engagement. We can have a consulting arrangement and work with them in that way to make it more achievable. Same thing with proactive incident response. One of my pet peeves is that a lot of folks that are in the incident response pay, they want to charge minimum $25,000. Some of them start at $50,000 for a retainer. And in some cases, it's use it or lose it. That's obviously out of reach for a lot of organizations. With us, we'll start as low as the $1,800 range for 8 hours. And then we'll allow them to use it for any of our services if they don't have an incident within that year. So we give them a 90-day grace period where they can apply it for testing or consulting or something else that they need. And then with Provision, it's based on a combination of the number of devices, the types of technologies, the size. There's a lot of factors, but we do try to make it very affordable even for SMBs. And we have a bundle with Checkpoint where they can get the firewall and a scaled down version of our service for as low as $200 a month for everything. So there's a full range of pricing, and don't feel that an engagement is too small. We have everything from a client, it's a 3-person medical office, up to low-level enterprise. And how you can make money, we took our average revenue per client, throwing out the very small and the very large, and it came out to $13,000 as far as per project in 2017. So just getting one project with one client, $13,000, you're setting your markup, but the average markup being 25%, that's $3,250 of revenue for you for the first year. And because a lot of this is repeat business or ongoing, you can see that you can build commission with that one customer in year 5 of over $16,000 and over $30,000 in year 10. But look at the numbers as you add 10 customers, 50 customers, or even 100 customers. And you can see there's a real opportunity to increase your revenue stream without adding overhead on your part, because you're leveraging us for the pre-sales. We help you with collateral. We're giving you these statements of work. We're performing the work, and we have our own project managers. So we see it all the way through. We're supporting you with everything. And so it really is an opportunity to solve your customers' problems, be a hero for them, but also add a lot to your bottom line and help offset some of the shrinking margins in hardware and software. How do you get started? This is what I love about the relationship with SaaSmax, because we really couldn't have made it any easier. If you're not already a SaaSmax partner, you sign up, very simple. Then we can set up a reseller overview. Well, I'll go a little more in depth into our services and how they work and how to prospect and answer specific questions about your client base and your marketplaces. We can do a deeper dive, 30 to 60-minute training presentation for your sales team and your pre-sales team if you have other folks on staff. And that's really it. At that point, I really encourage people, don't get too bogged down into how do I get started. Just use those simple questions in the reseller guide that we'll give you to start telling your customers that you have this resource, that you're adding these services to your portfolio, and you'll see the opportunities will start to come. And then I'm going to be here with you to make sure that you look good and they look good and they're happy and everything's growing along and you get that nice money tree started. So did want to remind you about the special offer as a little encouragement to get your folks started. We wanted to do $100 spiff for closed business on the consulting and testing side and a $250 spiff for MSSP deals that are closed by September 30th of 2018. Most deals, it's about a 60-day cycle, so that does give you time to get ramped up and get some deals in the pipeline and make some extra money for yourself or your sales team.
All
and
right.
Laura, hopefully we have some questions.
Yes, we have so many questions. They just kept coming.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So I want to be aware of everybody's time. We're almost at the half-hour mark. If you do need to drop off for some reason, thank you so much for being here. We are going to be sending out a recording. If you can stay on, please stay on, because we've got some really, really great questions that have come in. All right, so Rodney has a whole bunch of questions. I'm going to kind of combine them all. First off, where is the simple one? Where is the East Coast office?
I am in lovely East Windsor, Connecticut, 10 miles from Bradley International Airport.
Up by Hartford.
By Hartford.
Okay. And Rodney wants to know a little bit more about the marketing collateral or reseller portal. Can they customize, white label, and is web content available?
Okay. So we have a partner portal through our website that once you become a partner, you have access to, and our case studies and data sheet collateral can be co-branded if you have InDesign. For folks that don't have InDesign, our marketing team will help them out if they need to put their logo on something and they don't have the capacity to do that. As far as web content, that is something that you are able to create based on our collateral. Again, sometimes we're asked to assist a little bit with that through our marketing team, and we can help with that as well. And then the reseller guide is what I hear is one of the most useful tools for a new reseller. That goes through some of the common questions and objections that you might get and how to overcome them, and really helps people to get started in a simplistic way, and you don't have to be super technical. For white labeling on the cyber testing, very easy to do white labeling if you choose to. We actually recommend that you just sell us as a powered by Foresite service, because it does show that separation of duties and the credentials are going to be under Foresite. But you do have the option to white label even with the provision. Most of the time that's done as a co-managed, so we can have your logo and your colors showing up in your customers' portals. On compliance, though, we really don't white label, because the consultants, the auditors are going to be face-to-face with the client, and that really needs to be a relationship of trust. And so they need to know who they're dealing with, and we're not comfortable not being upfront about that. So again, we can help you through how to explain that to your customers, but it's really not an issue for clients. They understand if they know that you just added PCI, they might be leery of giving you their audit if they feel like you just started doing this. So it's usually a plus, not a minus to customers.
Okay. He did have one other question. Did you say you do on-site visits?
We do. For compliance, there's really almost always an on-site component required. For a lot of the testing, pen testing, social engineering, even some of the cloud consulting or virtual CISO, a lot of that can be done remotely, which saves the clients on cost. So when we go through the scoping, we discuss these things, and we'll let you know what needs to be done on site, what needs to be done remotely. Our Provision solution is implemented entirely remotely, so there's no on-site required there.
Great. We have a very involved question from Gus. It says, a few questions for the Cloud SIM offering. And I think I'll break it down, and instead of just trying to give you all of it. Do you only ingest log data, and where is it stored?
Okay, so we do ingest log data, and it's typically going to be, remembering this is security-based. Firewalls, absolutely, and we want to have core servers for correlation, so Active Directory, domain controller, endpoint solution, all of that helps with the correlation for threats. When they fall under compliance, there are other things that may be in scope, like switches that may not have a ton of value from what we're looking for, but they might be required to ingest those as well. The logs are stored locally. Our log collector, our cloud-based SIM, there's going to be a version that's installed on a virtual machine or a physical appliance at their location. And then just the aggregated log data is pushed into our cloud SIM. And so the client, the reseller, and Foresite all have full access to the log data, can pull reports, can view tickets and everything from that cloud-based SIM. But the actual raw data does not leave the client's environment, and all data that's pushed to the cloud-based SIM stays in country.
All right. The second part of his question, could you please describe your client onboarding process? For example, time frame, resources assigned to engagement, development of a run book.
Sure. So that sounds like, again, he's referring to the Provision MSSP solution. It really varies based on the size of the client. So if we have an SMB client, for example, who's buying a checkpoint with the Provision bundle, they're up and running typically within an hour once the reseller installs or the client installs the firewall and contacts us so that we can pull the logs. So it can be that simple. For very large environments, there's obviously a lot more to it. They have a bunch of different technologies, customizing of business rules, different alerts going to different teams and talking through that whole process. So we have an onboarding checklist that we go through with them, set up as a project where we have a project manager and a kickoff. And then every provision client is also assigned a technical account manager. And so that is an ongoing person that they work with who is in charge of making sure that ongoing tuning is happening and that on a monthly or quarterly basis, we have calls with the client and the reseller, if the reseller wants to be involved, to go through what we're seeing and make sure that they understand what's happening in their environment, that they see the reporting, that we're making any changes needed. But just like if you're monitoring for network support, making sure the network is running well, if you don't have some communication with the customer and everything's going great and you're preventing everything, they may not see the value because they don't know what's happening in the background. So we find it's really eye-opening for the customer to see that they had millions of logs and we investigated 27 events and they might have only seen one ticket, but to see what's going on in the background and realize how needed the service actually is.
That kind of answers part of this next part of his question, which was around the alerts. So the definition of the alerts, and some of this is a little technical and we might be better off doing an individual, but I think it's a good question. Definition of alerts, severity 1, 2, 3, response time on a severity 1, and what is the deliverable to the client on an alert? For example, data correlation of existing threats in the wild, vertical attacks, etc.
So I'll answer this in the simplistic way, and certainly we can set up a deeper dive with a technical resource for Gus in particular, or anybody else who has deeper technical questions and or wants to see the actual portal. In the simplistic way, alerts are the first thing that comes out of the business rules and the sort of the artificial intelligence part of the solution. So when the data flows through, if it triggers on a business rule or something looks suspicious, that generates what we call an alert. And then the client's not notified at that point because our security operations team, we don't want to flood them with a bunch of false positives potentially. That's when people becomes the boy who cried wolf and they stop paying attention because they just get overwhelmed. So we're doing that investigation, and when we present to the customer and or the reseller, we're saying, here's what the alert was, here's the investigation that we did, the associated logs, the intelligence that we pulled, and either here's what we did to remediate it, or here's what you need to do next as a remediation step. So our SLAs on an urgent request are going to be notification within an hour, but as far as the SLAs will vary, and again, we can share a copy of them in more detail based on the type of incident and also the level of service the client has. We obviously can't make a firewall configuration change if we're in monitoring only service and we don't have access to the firewall. So in that case, it would be a notification by us versus a firewall change being made.
If a client has an existing SIM platform, will you co-manage, and what platforms do you have resources to support, and what's that tuning process for that?
That's a great question. So we do not manage any other SIM platform. For clients who were in line with a SIM, we leverage their SIM as a centralized log collector, but we still forward the raw logs through our product because we don't want, most of the time, they're not optimally configured for security. That's just what we've always seen. And so we are not going to take that on and redo all of that configuration and sunk cost. We're just going to pull the raw logs and put them through our solution so that we have confidence that our business rules and the threat intelligence that we're putting against it are going to give the client the value that they want from a security monitoring side. So if the client has an unsuccessful solution, in most cases, they can run in line for a while, but they're going to end up replacing it once they see everything they're getting from Provision. If they have Splunk in particular is one that sometimes people have it, they have put the time in, they've gotten other reporting that they want from it, great, we can run side by side with them, but it is still their responsibility to keep the Splunk instance tuned and running and supported outside of Provision.
Okay. I think that covered all of the questions that Gus has. Gus, if it doesn't, please type in, or if you have another question. We have another question. What impact does GDPR have on cybersecurity?
It's making people a little more aware of cybersecurity, I guess, because there are so many organizations that have some level of concern because they know that they have some data on citizens of Europe. So it's opening that conversation a little bit more. There's a lot still to be determined, to be honest with you, with GDPR and how it will be enforced over in the U.S. And there are some vague things that need to be further defined, like one of the statements, I may not be saying this exactly right, but it's if you have massive amounts of data on European citizens, how do you define massive? So these are all things that our auditors and consultants work with clients on. And we had an engagement where we were brought in by a reseller, and the client was able to go in and check and see that under 5% of his customer base was citizens of Europe. So we gave him some things that he can do to not ignore the regulation, but he has a very strong defense to not have to fully comply with all of the requirements, which are very onerous if you only have a small fraction of clients where you have that data. So these are the kinds of things that we can talk through. And again, it's going to evolve. And as it evolves, we'll be staying on top of it so we can continue to advise customers as to how it will affect them. But think about the fact that the U.S. is bound to be doing something soon anyway. So it's good to start thinking about, what are you collecting? Why? Do you really need it? How much of it do you already have that maybe you want to get rid of instead of having that responsibility? And then who has access to it? If you have a wide open network and one share and personal data from 20 years ago, that's a huge exposure that maybe you want to reduce before something happens.
It's so funny because I can't get over how many people just have no clue. And the way you just described it was absolutely perfect. So
when you think about even SMBs, if it's $150 roughly per exposed record as far as the cost, right, it doesn't take much for it to add up.
Yeah. So it's a huge market for any U.S.-based MSP or reseller to go out there and just start evaluating in preparation. I mean, it's a big market.
Exactly. Just start having these conversations.
Yeah.
Right.
I love that you had that beautiful set of questions on the slide that really helped the MSP create the questions that they can begin having with their clients. So simple, but yet they're so targeted and open-ended. So perfect. Let me just
Great. And don't forget, if you're not asking these questions, somebody else might, and then you may end up losing the client. So don't hold back, jump in, ask the questions, and then when you need support, we're here to back you up.
That was a great webinar, and thank you everybody who was able to stay on. Over 90% of the attendees were able to stay through to the end. So thank you everybody, and thank you Tracy for giving us such great information and great ways for our MSPs to actually just start the conversation that maybe they're not having. And
thank you everybody for attending.
And if you don't leave money on the table, get started with Foresite and SASMAX. Clint Gatewood and the channel success team is always there to help you do it. And thank you for sticking around everybody. And Tracy, thanks for a great webinar. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, Laura.